The plane lifted off the runway just as the sun was beginning to fade behind a line of distant hills. Inside, the cabin felt calm, almost sleepy. People were settling in for the journey ahead, adjusting their seats, scrolling through their phones, or staring quietly out of small oval windows. It was the kind of flight no one thinks twice about. Just another trip, just another ordinary day. In seat 18A, a 16-year-old girl sat quietly, her backpack tucked neatly under the seat in front of her. She had chosen the window seat on purpose. She liked watching the ground slowly disappear, the roads turning into thin lines, the houses becoming tiny shapes. It gave her a strange sense of peace. She didn't talk much, not because she couldn't, but because she preferred to observe. Her headphones rested around her neck, not playing anything at the moment. Her eyes moved between the wing of the aircraft and the horizon beyond it. There was something steady about it all, predictable. At least, that's how it felt in the beginning. A few rows ahead, a middle-aged man was already asleep, his head leaning awkwardly to one side. Across the aisle, a mother tried to keep her young child entertained with a coloring book. A group of college students near the back laughed softly over something on a phone screen. Everything was normal, almost too normal. The girl leaned her head slightly against a window, letting the soft hum of the engine settle into the background. It reminded her of something familiar, not the exact sound, but the feeling, a memory she didn't often talk about. Her fingers lightly tapped against her knee, almost unconsciously, as if following a rhythm only she could hear. Minutes passed. The plane climbed higher, leveling out above the clouds. The seatbelt sign turned off with a soft chime. A flight attendant walked down the aisle with a polite smile, asking passengers if they needed anything. Drinks, snacks, small comforts to pass the time. When the attendant reached her row, the girl simply shook her head gently and offered a small smile. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't thirsty. She just wanted to sit. Everything felt steady. Then, slowly, something changed. It wasn't loud at first. Not something anyone could point to immediately. Just a shift in the air. A feeling. The girl noticed it before she understood it. Her eyes moved away from the window and toward the aisle. A flight attendant who had just passed her row was now walking back faster than before. Her smile was gone. Another crew member appeared from the front of the cabin, speaking in a low voice, but the urgency in it was clear even if the words weren't. Passengers began to notice. The laughter from the back of the plane faded. The mother across the aisle stopped mid-sentence, her eyes following the movement of the crew. Even the man who had been asleep stirred slightly, as if something had disturbed the quiet. The girl sat up a little straighter. Her fingers stopped tapping. She watched. 2 flight attendants disappeared behind the curtain, leading to the front of the plane. The curtain didn't close fully this time. It remained slightly open, just enough to reveal quick movements inside. Shadows shifting, voices overlapping. Something wasn't right. She felt it now. Clearly, her breathing slowed, not out of fear, but focus. A few minutes passed like that. Quiet tension spreading, filling the space where calm used to be. No announcements, no explanations, just silence, broken only by the constant hum of the engines. Then, suddenly, the seatbelt sign came back on. The soft chime echoed through the cabin, louder than it should have felt. Passengers looked at each other. A man a few rows behind her leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better view toward the front. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" But no one had an answer. The girl's eyes stayed fixed ahead. She wasn't guessing. She was listening. Every small sound, every movement, trying to piece it together. Then it came. The intercom clicked. A brief moment of static followed, and for a second, it seemed like no one would speak. The silence stretched just long enough to make people uneasy. And then the captain's voice. But it wasn't the voice people expected. It wasn't calm and reassuring. It wasn't the steady tone passengers were used to hearing at the start of a flight. It was tight, controlled, and underneath it, something else. "Ladies and gentlemen," he paused. It was only a second, but it felt longer. "We are currently experiencing an unexpected situation in the cockpit." The words landed heavily. Passengers straightened in their seats. Conversation stopped completely now. Even the child across the aisle went quiet. sensing the shift in the room. The girl didn't move. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in concentration. The voice continued, slightly strained. If there is anyone on board with flight experience. Another pause, not for effect, for breath, specifically military aircraft experience. F-18s. The words didn't make sense at first, not to most people. A few passengers exchanged confused looks. Someone let out a small, nervous laugh. Quickly silenced when no one else reacted. F-18s? Why would that matter? Why would that even be asked? The cabin filled with a kind of disbelief. People were trying to process what they had just heard, but it didn't fit into anything familiar. This wasn't a movie. This was real. The girl felt her heartbeat, steady but stronger now. F-18. The words echoed in her mind, not as a question, as something known, something she had heard before, many times. Her gaze dropped for a moment, landing on her hands resting in her lap. They were still, calm, but inside her, something had shifted. Memories began to surface. Not all at once, but in pieces. A room filled with screens. A voice guiding her, patient but firm. Again, hands on controls, smaller back then but determined. Focus. The feeling of pressure, not fear, expectation. Trust what you see, not what you feel. Her jaw tightened slightly. Back in the cabin, no one moved. No one spoke, because no one could. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The girl slowly lifted her head again. Her eyes moved forward, toward the front of the plane, toward the unseen cockpit, where something was clearly very wrong. She knew what this meant. Not completely, but enough. Her fingers curled slightly, then relaxed. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not now. She had never imagined a moment like this would come. Not outside of controlled spaces. Not without supervision. Not without someone beside her guiding every step. But the voice on the intercom hadn't been uncertain about one thing. They needed help. Real help. And there was none coming from outside. Only from inside this cabin. A man across the aisle shook his head slowly, whispering, "This can't be real." Someone else muttered, "Why would they even ask that?" The confusion grew heavier. But for the girl, the confusion was already clearing. What remained was something else. A decision. Her breathing stayed. Steady. Her mind moved quickly, going over things she hadn't thought about in a long time. Not because she forgot them, but because she never needed them. Until now, the silence stretched again. No one stood up. No one spoke. Because no one could answer that question, except her shoulders lifted slightly as she took a quiet breath. She didn't look around. She didn't wait for someone else. Because she already knew. Slowly, almost carefully, she raised her hand. At first, no one noticed. It was a small movement in a cabin full of frozen people. But then, the woman sitting beside her turned, her eyes widening slightly in confusion. "You!" she whispered, barely audible. The girl didn't respond. Her hand stayed raised. Steady, certain. A flight attendant further down the aisle caught the movement. She hesitated for a split second, as if unsure whether she had seen correctly. Then her eyes locked onto the girl. There was disbelief there, and hope. She moved quickly down the aisle, her steps faster than before, stopping just beside her seat. "Did you?" the attendant began, her voice low but urgent. The girl nodded once. Simple, clear, no hesitation. "I can help," she said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried weight, the kind that changes everything. For a moment, the attendant just stared at her, trying to process what she was hearing, what she was seeing. A teenager, 16, calm, certain. It didn't match. It didn't make sense. But nothing about the situation did, and time was running out. The attendant swallowed, then spoke into her intercom quickly, her voice sharp with urgency now. "I think we have someone." The girl lowered her hand slowly, her eyes still focused ahead. The calm from earlier hadn't disappeared. It had changed, turned into something stronger, something ready. And as the plane continued through the sky, carrying dozens of lives inside it, something unthinkable had just begun. Not in the cockpit, but in seat 18A, where a quiet girl, unnoticed just minutes ago, had just stepped into a moment no one else could. The flight attendant didn't waste a second after hearing her answer. She leaned closer, studying the girl's face as if searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation. But there was none, just a steady look, calm in a way that didn't match her age. "How much experience?" the attendant asked quietly, her voice tight. The girl took a small breath. "Not with this type of plane," she said honestly. "But I understand flight systems, controls, and I've trained on military simulators. F-18 mostly." The words sounded unreal even as she said them out loud. The attendant blinked, clearly unsure what to make of it. For a moment, it felt like she might question her further, maybe even dismiss it, but then the plane gave a slight, sudden drop. Gasps rippled through the cabin. That decided everything. "Stay here," the attendant said quickly, already reaching for the intercom clipped to her uniform. Her voice shifted the moment she spoke into it, sharper now, more urgent. "She says she has experience." "Repeat." "We may have someone with flight training." There was a pause. Static. Then a voice came through, low and tense. Not the captain this time. "Bring her. Now." The attendant looked back at the girl. The disbelief hadn't vanished, but it had been pushed aside by something stronger. The need to act. "Come with me." The girl nodded and unfastened her seatbelt. The small click sounded louder than it should have. The woman sitting beside her moved her legs aside quickly, still staring in shock. "You're serious?" she whispered. The girl gave a small nod. "I'll try." That was all she said. No promises, no dramatic words, just the truth. As she stepped into the aisle, dozens of eyes turned toward her. People who had been strangers just minutes ago were now watching closely, searching her face for answers she didn't have yet. She could feel it, the weight of their attention, their fear, their silent questions. But she didn't look at them. She kept her eyes forward. The walk to the front of the plane felt longer than it should have. Each step carried a strange mix of memories and reality. The hum of the engines, the narrow aisle, the low lighting. It all blended into something surreal. Another small drop in the aircraft made a few passengers grab their armrests. A baby began to cry somewhere behind her. The calm from earlier was completely gone now. Near the front, another crew member pulled the curtain aside. The moment it opened, the difference in atmosphere was clear. The quiet tension of the cabin was replaced by urgency. Voices overlapped, quick movements. The sound of something being adjusted, pressed, checked. The girl stepped through. The curtain closed behind her. For a brief second, she stood still, taking it all in. A crew member was kneeling beside someone on the floor. Another stood nearby, speaking rapidly into a headset. No one looked relaxed. No one looked in control. Then the co-pilot turned. His eyes landed on her, and for a moment, confusion flickered across his face. It was almost instinctive. He expected someone older, someone trained, someone official. Not this. "Her?" he asked, unable to hide the disbelief in his voice. The flight attendant nodded quickly. "She says she has experience. It's all we have." The co-pilot ran a hand across his forehead, clearly under pressure. He looked back toward the cockpit, then at the girl again. Time was slipping. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm but rushed. "No more delays." He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly as if trying to ground the moment. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered. It felt strange saying it here, in this situation, like it belonged to a different version of her. He nodded quickly, but there was no time for introductions beyond that. "I need you to listen carefully," he said. "This is not a fighter jet. Everything is heavier, slower to respond, but the principles are the same. You understand that?" "Yes," she said. Her voice didn't shake. That caught his attention more than anything else. Behind him, the crew member on the floor shifted slightly, drawing the girl's eyes for a moment. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The situation was already clear enough. The co-pilot noticed her glance and spoke quickly. "We lost a mid-flight. I'm handling it, but I need help managing everything." He gestured toward the cockpit. "And right now, I need another set of hands that knows what they're doing." There it was. No more doubt. No more time to think about whether this was possible. Only whether she could do something. The girl gave a small nod. I understand. The co-pilot studied her for one last second, as if making a final decision. Then he stepped aside. Come on. She moved forward, her steps steady despite everything happening around her. The entrance to the cockpit felt smaller than she expected, the space tighter, filled with light from the instrument panels. As she stepped inside, the door closed behind her. The world outside that small space faded instantly. Now it was just the cockpit, and everything inside it. Lights blinked across the control panel. Screens displayed information she recognized. Altitude, speed, heading, but arranged differently than what she was used to. Alarms weren't blaring constantly, but there were warning indicators flashing, demanding attention. The co-pilot slid back into his seat, adjusting something quickly before looking at her again. Sit there, he said, pointing to the captain's seat. For a moment, she didn't move, not out of fear, but because she understood what that meant. That seat wasn't just a chair. It was responsibility, control, every life on this plane. The co-pilot's voice cut through her thoughts. We don't have time. She nodded once and stepped forward, lowering herself into the seat. It felt different from anything she had sat in before. Bigger, more complex, but not completely unfamiliar. Her eyes moved across the instruments, scanning, taking it in, adapting. The co-pilot began speaking again, faster now, but still clear. Autopilot is struggling. We've had system instability. I need you to help monitor inputs and keep us steady while I coordinate with ground control. She nodded again, her focus already shifting to the controls. Her hands hovered for a second, then rested lightly where they needed to be. Not gripping, not shaking, just ready. Talk to me, the co-pilot said. Tell me what you see. She took a breath. Altitude holding, but fluctuating slightly, she said. Speed is a bit high, not critical yet. Heading is drifting. The co-pilot glanced at her, surprised. She wasn't guessing. She was reading it, understanding it. Good, he said quickly. We'll correct gradually. No sudden moves. Another slight drop in the aircraft made the controls feel heavier for a moment. The girl adjusted instinctively, small, controlled movements. Not overreacting, not freezing, just responding. Inside her mind, everything was sharpening. The fear from the cabin, the eyes of the passengers, the strange reality of the situation. All of it was fading into the background. What remained was focus, pure and steady. A memory surfaced again, clearer this time. A voice. Stay ahead of the aircraft. Don't chase it. Her grip adjusted slightly. She wasn't chasing. She was anticipating. Outside the cockpit windows, the sky stretched endlessly, calm and indifferent to what was happening inside the aircraft. Inside, every second mattered. The co-pilot spoke into his headset, coordinating with ground control, his words quick and precise. The girl didn't interrupt. She kept her attention on the instruments, making small corrections as needed. Good, keep that, he said after a moment, noticing the change in stability. It wasn't perfect, but it was better, a lot better. And for the first time since this had started, something shifted in the cockpit. Not relief, not yet, but belief. The co-pilot glanced at her again, this time differently. Not with doubt, but with something closer to trust. You've done this before, he said quietly. The girl didn't look at him. Not like this, she replied. And that was the truth. This wasn't a simulator. There was no reset button, no instructor guiding her step by step, just real consequences, real lives. The plane steadied slightly under her control, not perfectly, but enough to give them time. And right now, time was everything. The co-pilot adjusted his headset again, speaking to ground control with renewed focus. We have partial control stabilized. Repeat, partial control stabilized. The girl kept her eyes forward, her hands steady, her breathing even. Just minutes ago, she had been another passenger, quiet, unnoticed. Now, she was sitting in the captain's seat, holding the line between chaos and control. And this was only the beginning. The cockpit felt like a different world now, separate from the cabin behind it, separate from the sky outside. The girl's hands rested lightly on the controls, her eyes scanning the instruments like a musician reading sheet music for the first time. Every dial, every light, every tiny movement mattered. One wrong step could make the difference between disaster and survival. The co-pilot leaned slightly closer, keeping one hand on the throttle, the other tapping buttons to stabilize systems that were failing. "The autopilot is offline for most functions," he said quietly, his voice calm but strained. "We have to do this manually. I'll guide you, but I need you to stay focused." "Understood." She nodded. Understood. It wasn't just words. It was a promise to herself and everyone on board. The plane was heavier than she expected. She had flown simulators, spent hours with controls she thought she knew, but this was different. The cabin shook slightly as turbulence bounced them, and alarms flashed in small bursts across the panels. Each sound pulled at her focus, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she adjusted her grip, small movements to correct the drift. "Altitude is dropping," the co-pilot said. His eyes flicked to her quickly. "We need a steady climb. Gradual, no sharp movements." She inhaled slowly and pushed the control stick forward slightly, then back, fine-tuning. It wasn't instinct alone. It was memory. Years of watching, listening, practicing. Every adjustment counted. The plane responded. Slowly. Too slowly for her taste, but steadily. She could feel the subtle shifts, the weight of the fuselage responding to her hands. Her heart was steady, but her mind was working at full speed, calculating, predicting, adjusting. "Good," the co-pilot said after a moment. "Keep it there. I'll handle radio communications with ground control. They're giving us instructions for the nearest airport. They're ready to help, but we need to hold her steady first." The girl didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She was already moving with the plane, anticipating the shifts, feeling the difference between air pressure changes, the slight lurch of turbulence, and the response of controls. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly. The sun was fading, the sky turning shades of gray and pink. It could have been beautiful, peaceful even, if anyone had had the luxury of noticing. But inside the cockpit, every second mattered. Every moment was survival. The co-pilot spoke again. "We've lost one of the main navigational systems. I need you to monitor altitude and heading. Keep us from drifting too far off course. You see the indicators? Watch those closely." She nodded. Her eyes moved from one panel to another, reading, checking, predicting. It felt like a dance. A high-stakes dance where any misstep could cost everything. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The cabin behind them was quiet. Only the occasional hum of the engines and the faint noise of passengers shifting in their seats. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't see her hands, her calm precision, or the way she adjusted for every tremor, every minor imbalance. She felt the tension in the co-pilot beside her. He was speaking to ground control, giving updates, but his eyes kept flicking toward her, measuring her reactions. Was she panicking? Was she hesitating? He needed to know that she could handle it. She could. A memory came unbidden. Her father, teaching her about small corrections, about predicting the aircraft's movements before they happened. "Think ahead," he had said. "Don't react after moves. Stay ahead." That memory guided her now. She wasn't just responding. She was anticipating, feeling the plane's weight shift before it even did, correcting in advance. The co-pilot glanced at her again, and for the first time, a flicker of awe crossed his face. "You're good at this," he said softly. "Better than I expected." She didn't smile. There was no time for that. There couldn't be. She adjusted again, small movements, keeping the plane level, watching the altitude. Then a warning beep sounded, louder than the others. A red light flashed insistently. The co-pilot reacted instantly, pressing buttons, flipping switches, but she noticed the drift caused by the sudden alert. She corrected it immediately, smoothing the movement, holding the plane steady. "Good work," he said, his voice more urgent now. "Keep it like that. We're approaching an area of turbulence. Brace yourself. We'll need to adjust again quickly." The turbulence hit suddenly. The plane lurched, a sharp drop that made her stomach clench. She felt the weight of the aircraft, felt its resistance, and moved with it, adjusting controls with precision, keeping the wings level, the nose steady. The co-pilot watched, impressed and relieved. "Excellent," he said. "You're keeping her stable." For a moment, the world narrowed down to the two of them, the hum of the engines, the flashing lights, the controls beneath her hands. Every second counted. Every movement mattered. There was no room for fear, only focus. The co-pilot spoke again, quieter this time. "We need to prepare for landing. I'll guide you through the process, but I need you to stay calm. The approach will be tricky. Narrow runway, limited visibility. You understand?" She nodded. "Yes." He adjusted some switches, bringing up approach indicators. The plane responded sluggishly to her hands, but she had anticipated the delay. Slowly, gradually, they began the descent. The cabin behind the cockpit was still unaware of the full extent of what was happening. Passengers murmured, some still nervous, some trying to distract themselves with screens or books. They had no idea that a teenager, barely 16, was guiding them through what could have been disaster. Her hands moved constantly, small adjustments, corrections, anticipation. She could feel the plane's momentum, its response to every input. She monitored the altitude, the speed, the heading, as the co-pilot spoke calmly, giving directions, adjusting communication with control tower. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. Every vibration, every minor shake demanded attention. She didn't allow herself to think about fear. She didn't allow herself to think about what could happen. Only the next movement, the next correction, the next adjustment. The co-pilot's voice was steady now, instructing her step by step. Lower the landing gear slowly. Check the flaps, keep the nose slightly up, adjust speed. She followed every instruction. Not perfectly, not without challenge, but effectively. The plane responded to her adjustments. And for the first time, a sense of control began to take shape in the cockpit. Her mind was focused, her body steady. She was no longer the passenger who had raised her hand. She was the one controlling the aircraft, anticipating every shift, holding steady against the turbulence, the failing systems, and the weight of responsibility. Outside, the sky was gray, clouds thickening as evening approached. Visibility was limited, but inside the cockpit, the world had narrowed even further. To the instruments, the co-pilot's instructions, the plane's movements, and the knowledge that every second counted. The co-pilot glanced at her one last time before speaking. "We'll make it," he said. "Just keep doing what you're doing." She didn't respond with words. She didn't need to. Her hands moved, her eyes scanned, her mind calculated. The plane descended steadily, guided by the instincts, memories, and calm determination of someone who had trained for situations like this, even if she had never imagined it would happen in real life. Every small correction, every careful movement, was bringing them closer to safety. And for the first time, a faint sense of hope began to build, fragile but real. It wasn't over, not by far, but the hardest moments were passing. And the girl, once just another passenger, had become the heart of it all. She had taken control. She had stabilized the plane. And she wasn't going to let it fail. Not now. Not ever. The cockpit lights reflected off her determined eyes as the plane continued its descent. Outside, the horizon stretched, vast and uncertain. But inside, a young girl had become something extraordinary. A guardian of the lives behind her, steady, focused, ready for whatever came next. The plane was descending steadily, but the tension inside the cockpit had not eased. Every movement, every sound, every flicker of light on the control panels demanded attention. The co-pilot was talking to ground control, his voice calm but precise, giving updates and receiving instructions. Every word carried weight. Every second mattered. The girl's hand stayed firm on the controls, adjusting constantly. She had never flown a plane this size before. She had never been in a real-life emergency like this. But her mind worked clearly, calmly, measuring, predicting, correcting. "Approach is coming up," the co-pilot said, pointing to the instruments. "We'll need to align with the runway quickly. Narrow landing, limited visibility. Keep your focus on speed and heading. I'll guide you." She nodded, her eyes scanning the panels. The runway was still miles away, but every second counted. Every small adjustment she made now would determine if they would touch down safely or if disaster waited. The plane shuddered slightly as it passed through a thin layer of turbulence. The instruments wavered and alarms beeped softly. She felt the resistance of the aircraft, felt the nose tilt slightly forward, and corrected instantly. It wasn't instinct alone. It was memory. It was practice. It was everything she had learned from hours of training, from watching, from listening. The co-pilot glanced at her, noticing how quickly she adapted. "Good," he said softly. "You're keeping her steady." Outside, clouds moved across the dim sky. Visibility was low, and the runway lights ahead were faint but visible. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to guide them. "Prepare to lower the landing gear," the co-pilot instructed. "Flaps down slowly. Keep the nose up. Watch the speed carefully. We don't want a sudden drop or bounce." Her hands moved as if they had a mind of their own. She lowered the landing gear gradually, monitoring the instruments. The flaps extended smoothly, and she adjusted the controls to maintain balance. The plane responded to her, almost like it trusted her hands. The co-pilot's voice was steady, giving instructions with precision. "Speed is a bit high. Slight reduction. Keep the descent angle shallow. We can't afford a hard impact." She complied, feeling the subtle shift as the plane slowed slightly. Every movement was careful, deliberate. She felt the weight of every life on board, the pressure responsibility pressing down. But it didn't break her focus. Passengers in the cabin behind them were unaware of the delicate control happening just feet away. Some murmured. Some stared nervously out the windows. Some clutched their armrests. They had no idea that a 16-year-old girl was guiding them through what could have been disaster. The co-pilot continued, his voice calm but insistent. "We're approaching the final stage. Keep your hands steady. Focus on alignment. Watch the nose, watch the speed, watch the drift." She did all of that and more. Her eyes flicked between the instruments, the faint lights of the runway, and the control panels. Every decision was immediate. Every correction was precise. Suddenly, a gust of wind hit the plane from the side, causing a slight tilt. The instruments warned of deviation and alarms beeped. She adjusted instantly, tilting the controls slightly, correcting the drift before it became dangerous. The co-pilot glanced at her, impressed. "Excellent," he said. "You've got this." Her breathing stayed steady. She didn't allow panic to creep in. She had no time for it. Only the plane, only the controls, only the lives depending on her focus. The runway lights grew brighter. They were closer now. The plane's shadows stretched across the faint clouds, moving steadily toward the ground. "Slow down just a bit more," the co-pilot instructed. "Flaps fully down now. Keep the nose slightly up. We'll touch down smoothly if we do this right." She adjusted the controls carefully. The plane responded, descending gradually. The engines hummed steadily, the instruments blinking in small rhythms. The co-pilot's instructions came fast, precise, and she followed them without hesitation. The plane was almost over the runway. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, in her arms, in her entire body. Every second mattered. The smallest mistake could mean disaster. "Steady, steady," the co-pilot murmured. She kept her hands firm, her eyes sharp. The landing gear was ready. Flaps fully extended. Speed gradually reduced. The first touch of the wheels against the runway was hard, but controlled. The plane bounced slightly, the tires skimming the asphalt. She adjusted immediately, correcting the nose angle and maintaining balance. The co-pilot spoke calmly, guiding her through critical seconds. "Hold it steady, don't overcorrect, keep straight." The second touch was smoother. The plane began to slow. She adjusted the controls slightly, keeping the descent controlled, keeping the alignment perfect. The runway stretched ahead, lights guiding them forward. The plane's wheels screeched softly against the asphalt as it continued to slow. Passengers in the cabin could hear the sound now. Some gasped, some held their breath, some muttered prayers. They still didn't know who was guiding the plane, but they could sense that the landing was being handled with care, precision, and calm determination. The co-pilot leaned back slightly, observing her as she guided the plane. "Almost there," he said. "Keep her steady. Don't let your focus slip." She adjusted the controls one last time. The plane slowed further. The nose was level. The tires gripped the runway firmly. And then it was over. The plane came to a complete stop. Silence filled the cockpit for a moment, broken only by the hum of the engines winding down. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the tension lift slightly. The co-pilot glanced at her, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. "You did it," he said softly. "You really did it." She nodded, not fully realizing the enormity of what had just happened. Her hands dropped from the controls. Her breathing slowed. She had guided the plane through turbulence, system failures, and a difficult landing. She had kept everyone safe. Outside, emergency lights flickered on as crews approached the plane, ready to assist if needed. But inside, the real work was done. The passengers began to stir, some clapping, some whispering in disbelief. They still didn't know who had taken control, but they could feel the result. Safety, calm, relief. The co-pilot spoke to them over the intercom, his voice calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely. Please remain seated until the crew instructs you to exit." The girl looked around the cockpit, at the array of instruments, at the controls she had handled so carefully. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. She had done something extraordinary, something that would be remembered. The co-pilot stood, offering her a small smile. "You handled that better than anyone could have expected," he said. She didn't respond immediately. Her mind was still on the instruments, still processing the fast-moving events. But she nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement, of understanding, of pride. The plane had touched the ground safely. She had guided it. Lives were safe. And for a 16-year-old girl, this was a moment that would stay with her forever. Outside, the sky continued to dim, night approaching. The runway lights glowed brightly against the darkening clouds. Inside, the girl sat quietly, absorbing what had just happened, realizing that courage doesn't always come from experience or age. Sometimes it comes from focus, clarity, and the decision to act when no one else can. The co-pilot checked the instruments one last time, confirming that everything was stable. "We're good," he said. "Thanks to you." She offered a small nod, feeling the relief settle slowly. The weight of responsibility had been heavy, but she had carried it. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and chaos, and had come through it with calm determination. As the cabin prepared for passengers to disembark, the girl remained in the cockpit, her hands resting lightly on the controls, reflecting on what had just occurred. She had been a passenger, unnoticed, quiet, and now she had been the one guiding the plane to safety, proving that courage and skill can appear in the most unexpected places. She exhaled again, quietly, letting herself absorb the relief, the accomplishment, and the knowledge that she had made a difference. For everyone on board, it was a landing they would never forget. And for her, it was a moment that would define what she was capable of, showing that even the youngest, quietest voices can rise to meet the most extraordinary challenges. The plane had finally come to a complete stop, the wheels resting firmly on the runway, engines humming as they powered down. Inside the cockpit, the girl sat back slightly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Her hands rested lightly on the controls, no longer moving to correct anything, no longer anticipating shifts or adjustments. The worst was over. She had guided the plane to safety. The co-pilot exhaled deeply, leaning back in his seat. Relief softened his expression for the first time since the crisis began. He glanced at the girl, still focused, still calm, her eyes scanning the instruments one last time before she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. "You did it," he said softly, as if speaking the truth aloud made it more real. She nodded. She wasn't sure she fully understood herself yet. It had been hours of tension, focus, and rapid decisions compressed into what felt like moments. Outside, emergency vehicles began to move along the runway, their lights flashing, ready for any unexpected situation. But they were no longer needed. The plane was safe. Everyone on board was safe. From the cabin, muffled applause and relieved whispers drifted toward the cockpit. Passengers were beginning to realize the danger they had just been through. And even though most of them didn't know the girl's role yet, they could sense it. Something extraordinary had happened. They had felt the calm, felt the control, and now, finally, they were allowed to breathe again. The co-pilot pressed a button on the intercom. His voice was steady, carrying reassurance and pride. Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely. Please remain in your seats until the crew gives further instructions. Your cooperation is appreciated. The girl stayed seated a moment longer, letting the gravity of the landing sink in. Her mind replayed the critical seconds, the choices she had made, the instinctive corrections. She had acted. She had controlled the plane. She had saved lives. And yet, she felt no rush of triumph or glory, only a quiet, grounded relief. A flight attendant appeared at the cockpit door, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Everyone's safe," she said softly. You really helped." The girl nodded, her voice calm. "It was a plane. I just followed the controls." The attendant shook her head gently, a smile tugging at her lips despite the lingering tension. "No, you did more than that. You kept them alive. You guided them. You!" She paused, searching for words, then finally shook her head again. "You were amazing." The girl allowed herself another small nod, still not fully taking the praise. She looked at the co-pilot, who gave her a quiet thumbs up, a simple acknowledgement of her skill and bravery. In that moment, she realized that it wasn't about recognition or glory. It was about responsibility. It was about action when it mattered most. And she had done exactly that. The cabin began to stir. Passengers slowly unbuckled their seatbelts, exchanging nervous smiles, some hugging each other, others shaking hands quietly. They were alive. They were safe. And somewhere inside, they carried the unspoken gratitude for the young girl who had guided them, even if they didn't yet know her name. The co-pilot stood and gestured for her to follow. Together, they left the cockpit, stepping back into the aisle where passengers' eyes widened at the sight of her. Some whispered, some stared in disbelief. A few even clapped softly, not fully understanding, but recognizing that she had been at the center of something extraordinary. A man near the front leaned forward. "Wait, you were?" His voice faltered, unsure how to phrase what he was thinking. The girl shook her head gently, a small smile on her lips. "I just did what I could." That simple answer seemed to carry more weight than any elaborate explanation. People's expressions softened. Their awe was genuine. They had just survived a situation that could have ended in disaster, and a quiet, determined girl had made the difference. The flight attendants moved quickly, guiding passengers toward the exit doors. Emergency personnel had already arrived, but there was no immediate danger. Everyone was calm now, though still processing the extraordinary events. Outside, the runway lights reflected off the plane's polished fuselage. Emergency vehicles stood by, their flashing lights now more ceremonial than urgent. The night air was crisp, filled with the quiet hum of relief and gratitude. For the girl, it was surreal. She stepped out of the plane and felt the cool air on her face, the weight of adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a strange, quiet clarity. People approached, curious, nervous, and grateful. Some wanted to shake her hand. Some wanted to ask questions. Some just wanted to look at her, to understand how someone so young could act with such calm and precision. But she stayed composed, letting them approach without overwhelming herself. A senior crew member stepped forward, holding a clipboard but more interested in her than the paperwork. "That was extraordinary," he said. "I don't know how to thank you properly." The girl shook her head, her tone humble but firm. "I just did what I had to do. That's all." He nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "Most people would have panicked. Most people wouldn't have touched the controls. But you took command. You stayed calm. You saved everyone on this plane." She took a deep breath, letting the words settle. They weren't seeking praise. They were acknowledging what she had done. And in that recognition, she felt something she hadn't expected, a quiet pride, not for herself, but for what she had been able to do for others. The passengers were being guided off the plane, some turning back to wave or offer a nod of thanks. Some whispered her name, as if they had just discovered a hero among them. The girl watched them go, letting the feeling of relief spread slowly through her. The co-pilot stayed by her side, his expression a mix of admiration and quiet exhaustion. "You did more than anyone could have hoped for," he said. "I hope you know that." She nodded. "I do now." For a moment, they stood in silence, the plane behind them, the runway stretching into the night, the sky dark and vast above. Everything that had seemed impossible only moments ago now felt strangely real, tangible, and final. Emergency crews completed their checks, confirming that the aircraft was safe. Passengers were being led to buses that would take them to the terminal. Inside, conversations buzzed, stories being exchanged, whispers of disbelief and admiration floating through the air. A teenager had just taken control of a plane. A teenager had just guided it safely to the ground. The girl finally allowed herself to relax, the adrenaline fading, her muscles loosening. She could feel exhaustion creeping in, but it was different from panic or fear. This was a weariness of having done something significant, having faced danger, and having come through it intact. She looked around one last time at the plane, at the instruments she had monitored so carefully, at the controls that had responded to her hands. It had been a test she hadn't expected, a responsibility she hadn't imagined, but she had met it. She had risen to the occasion. The co-pilot turned toward her. "You've shown everyone what courage looks like. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet, focused, steady. That's what got us through." She smiled faintly. It wasn't a proud smile, not a triumphant one. It was calm, steady, accepting. Outside, the night was quiet except for the hum of vehicles and distant voices. The passengers were safe. The plane was safe. And she, once just a quiet teenager, had done something extraordinary. She took a deep breath and allowed herself a small nod, acknowledging the weight of what had just happened. Courage doesn't always come from experience, training, or age. Sometimes it comes from clarity, calm, and the willingness to act when no one else can. Tonight, that truth had been proven. For everyone on board, it would be a story they would never forget. For her, it would be a moment she would carry forever, a reminder that even in the most impossible situations, calm, focus, and courage could create miracles. As she walked toward the buses, ready to leave the runway behind, she felt a quiet satisfaction settle over her. The emergency had ended. The lives she had helped protect were safe. The plane, once a vehicle of uncertainty, now stood silent and secure. And she had done it. In that moment, she realized something important. Heroism doesn't always come with medals or applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the hands of someone who chooses to act when the world expects fear. She had chosen to act. And for that, she would never forget the feeling, the weight, the responsibility, the calm, and the knowledge that even the youngest, quietest voices can rise to meet extraordinary challenges. Tonight, she was not just a passenger. Tonight, she had been the heart of the flight. And everyone who survived would carry a part of that story with them. A story of courage, focus, and the remarkable strength of a 16-year-old who had refused to give in to fear.